now.
Sounds good. And I'm trying to tell, it looks like we only have a few folks in the shared document. So if you are new or just joining in, there is a link in the chat. So over on the right-hand side, the little bubble, if you click on that, and then Christy has posted the link to the shared document. So as we're waiting for folks to kind of get logged in, I'll start with my introduction. Those of you who don't know, my name's Wendy Tyree, and I teach at Billings Skyview. And you'll notice in the shared document, Bridget Paddock is also in there, but Bridget is coaching 2 volleyball teams right now and doing everything else. So she is sorry that she's not here, but obviously she did a lot of work to get this set up. So that's who I am, and then I'll just kind of pass it over so folks can introduce themselves. While they're doing that, there's a spot on the shared document for you to type in who you are and where you're from and what you teach.
Hi everybody, I'm Christy Mock-Stutz with the Office of Public Instruction. I'm the English Language Arts Instructional Coordinator here. And I have on my screen, and you should be able to see it on your screen, that Google Doc that Wendy was just talking about. And you can see here I've input my information, and I will select a different color for it. I will be green today. And so if you can log in using the Google Doc link in the chat box, then you can write some of your responses into this document. But I'm happy to see you all here this afternoon. Next up, maybe Kurt.
Good afternoon. I have my camera up on top of my desktop, so it gives, there's room up there too for the stand, and it gives the top-down view. So imagine you're talking down to me. I'm talking up to everyone in the group. I teach at the University of Great Falls and have enjoyed these sessions since, when did we start? January or about then, and have also enjoyed the variety of the interface. These tables with a grid so that we put our comments in the same location for each response is a promising development. I look forward to being able to look exactly for Bridget or Melissa's comments to target responses. So good to see everyone.
So I'll go next. I am Melissa Horner. I am an English teacher in Park City, Montana. So I teach 9 through 12 English language arts.
And Marjorie, we see that you're on, but I think you're muted. So if you want to introduce yourself to us. Maybe Marjorie's there.
Hello, I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yep, now we can.
Okay, I'm the, what's my fancy title? Okay, I'm the Professional Learning Data and Information Specialist, System Specialist, so I'm new at this, so I'm just watching. So.
Well,
Marjorie's new to our team here at OPI, so I'm very excited to introduce her today and get her to know the PLC format and the GoToMeeting platform, and so welcome, Marjorie.
Thanks.
Christy, can you tell, do we have one more? I feel like there's a Milena, maybe?
We do, and it does look like Milena, but it seems like she's kind of logged in and out. So Milena, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you can't see us. Feel free to chat something if we can help with some sort of technical assistance. I see it's like kind of offline right now, so maybe she's having some internet connectivity issues. So hopefully
so
she'll
we'll just
join
kind of
us.
Pay attention to it, and as other folks come in, I know there's a couple people who are going to join after meetings or kids soccer practices or whatever's going on.
Yep.
So back into that shared document, our first quote that we're going to look at comes out of Marshall, and you can see it there. It was the main kind of piece for today, which is making meaning real, and it just says we have to find ways to provide kids with experiences in their learning. They can't just have distorted shadows of experience. They need to learn to read by reading. No surprise there. Allington and many other researchers have told us time and time again that students improve their ability as readers by reading. The same is true in writing, math, science, learning a foreign language, learning to swim, learning to drive, everything. And so our first question, if you can just choose one of those boxes down below, question number 2, and then just tell us what is one way you successfully engage your students in your class, and it might be, you know, something kind of different, whatever it is. So we'll just spend a couple minutes and write. So again, we don't have that large of a group this week. Looks like most folks are kind of wrapping up their comments in that shared document. I think most of you are familiar with just kind of commenting on other people's. One of the things that we really like about this go-to meeting is that it gives us the opportunity to talk with lots of people at lots of different points. There's some really interesting things. Melissa, do you want to talk a little bit about what you shared on yours?
Yeah, definitely. So, Wendy, you know some of it, and Christy, you too. Last year when I presented to NCTE, I got really interested in the idea of engaging students, specifically students who didn't want to be engaged in ELA classrooms. So in reading about the conversations that academics are having and research that's being done around this, this is something that I have incorporated into my classroom, where I literally make invitations often. It's not just for one set lesson or one set unit, but I invite students to bring in basically literacy practices that are happening outside of school, and I invite them to incorporate them into the classroom. And a lot of the time it looks like it's not going to work just by face value. It's like, okay, we're working on Shakespeare and you are bringing in something about welding. It appears oftentimes like it's not going to work, but as it's turned out, more times than not, it does work. I mean, we make connections and we figure out how all the pieces fit together, and it's so much more rewarding, and the students are, and they're invested in it because it's their lesson too. It's not my lesson that I'm giving them.
I have to unmute myself here. And I have one comment that I was making is earlier this morning I had a state level meeting with some other ELA coordinators in other states, and we were talking about disciplinary literacy and just the idea of, you know, social studies teachers and science teachers and math teachers, and you know, sometimes they feel like, oh, here's the English teacher again telling us how to read and write in our discipline areas, but really it's the idea of getting them to think, hey, what is writing look like in my discipline? What does reading look like in my discipline? What does, what does that look like in my discipline? Because it exists, and they're the experts, and they can recognize where that is. And your idea of sort of having students bringing in these, different, you said new speeches, notes, letters, film clips, tattoos, all as examples of text, and that students need to be able to read, understand, and share out in different discipline areas as well. I think that kind of touches on that idea as well. That's just sort of a connection I made.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. A lot of it too, I think, is really creating a wider understanding of what we do in English class. I think it's so often misunderstood. They're like, I think I had a parent earlier this year that was like, are you going to do actual English things like grammar? And I'm like, that is the most bizarre question I've ever been asked. So just to speak to what you're saying, I think it's just broadening this understanding of what English class is and what we do in these classrooms.
And literacy, right? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think it sounds awesome, Melissa. I'm excited for things in Park City.
Yeah.
Kurt, you mentioned a book, and I'm not familiar with that book at all. Will you give us like the 2-minute rundown of what The Singing Bones is?
I'm just looking for one of the images to capture with my video cam. Actually, I can hold one up. For Snow White and Rose Red, this is the sculpture that illustrates the story.
I see.
And it is a collection of actually all of the Grimm's tales, 75 of them numbered through their sequence from the original collection, and just a one-page description of the stories, then with an image that the artist Sean Tan has sculpted or created with a 3D printer, I'm not sure which, that illustrates the story. And the illustrations, as you can tell by those two, and another one, are particularly thought-provoking, and in some cases a little bit on the disturbing side. The companionship of the cat and the mouse, for example. So at any rate, it was reviewed in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday in the usual weekly children's literature section. I always send a copy of that to my colleague here at UGF who teaches that class, and to Joyce Herbeck at MSU. And once in a while I see a description of a book that looks intriguing to me, and this was one of the weeks when that was true. Here's another one from Jorinda and Jorangel. So anyway, and the foreword by Neil Gaiman and Jack Zipes, the scholarly expert on European fairy tales, also add to its interest. And it's a very, very well-produced book, very thick, shiny pages. It looks like it'll last forever if I don't loan it to the wrong people.
Awesome. That sounds great. So I think we can kind of move on to question number 3. So question 3, right, is looking at how our standards and Common Core has enabled us or inhibited us to engage students. So again, we'll just spend a little bit of time writing right on question number 3, and again, any way, right, that the prompt kind of reaches you. So Christy, can we kind of default to you on this one? As we talk about standards, I know obviously that's the department you're coming out of, but I really liked a lot of the things you put in your piece. So
Sure, I will start. That is definitely standards in lots of academic areas have been the focus of a lot of my work here at OPI, of course. And I really I liked what Melissa was saying about sort of that glass ceiling. Like we're gonna keep going, and that's exactly what standards do. The standards sort of give us this idea, like, hey, here's what we're looking for. These are like sort of these checkpoints. I like that word checkpoint, like checking in, like we're moving along, but it's not an end game. Like this standard is not an end game. It is a step along the way on a journey to a lot greater understanding and to helping students make connections within their own learning to how to push themselves even further. And I think that that's the important part of the standards, that they aren't the ceiling, they aren't a goal we're working towards, but collectively they are steps in a process of learning. And I think that is a good way of looking at them. And that's certainly how I try to think of them here at OPI, and how I try to have teachers think about them, you know, and using them as tools rather than as goals necessarily. And I really like also the language, and that's one thing I wrote in here too, is that when teachers, students, parents come together and understand the standards, rather than an arbitrary A, B, C, D, E, F grade, sort of understanding the process, like, hey, we're going to accomplish this, and then we can move on to this and kind of keep going, it makes everyone sort of collectively understand that there is a journey happening rather than that finite grade. And so, Wendy, I feel you're so lucky to work in a school that supports the standards-based grading, because I think it helps to support that conversation and that idea of students that they can understand, oh, hey, I didn't get quite this, and it's because I didn't understand this piece, and I will work on that. And it just helps to formulate a bigger picture, I think, rather than all focused on that finite grade.
yeah, I feel very lucky that, I mean, as I'm working with, I know in some areas, standard-based grading is kind of a bad word. And I think that our department has really kind of embraced it, but I think if I was trying to do it on my own, it wouldn't be successful. But just since there's so many of us starting to kind of look at it and to have those conversations with students, and I like what Kurt said too, you know, as we look at this idea of, you know, the standards can be kind of a problem to solve, you know, and then to bring that back to Melissa's where it's a checkpoint. It's, okay, so great. And even talking to freshmen, you know, what does mastery look like as a freshman versus what does mastery look like as a senior versus what does mastery look like for your English teacher? You know, I mean, it's, and so to have that conversation that, yeah, okay, you might have mastered this aspect of it, but now look how they build on each other, and look at being familiar with it versus competent in it versus, you know, sophisticated in your ability, and just that power of the language of the standards, I think is where we lose parents sometimes in that conversation. And I know I need to get better at, you know, having those conversations, because I don't think there's a lot of parents who understand what it is, and a lot of parents who think that, you know, Common Core is this, you know, awful thing that we're doing with our standards.
Right. So. Yes, and that does, you know, there are, I mean, I think even just recently in Livingston there was a letter to the editor about them. So it's certainly a misunderstood area of education, I think, to put it precisely. And then also when you think about switching to standards-based grading, so many parents were raised on, you know, a certain structure of grading. And, you know, Kurt could maybe speak to this too at the college level. You need certain grades to get into college, to go on, to get a good job. And so in many people's mind, it's a very step-by-step understood process. And if we're asking them to change their thinking of that process and what the outcomes could potentially look like, that's hard for people to make that transition. And that is where parent communication, I think, comes in to understanding what this looks like, and how it's actually greater than just a quantifiable number in many ways. So.
I so appreciate what both of you just said. It so often happens here in Park City and with parents where they want everything linked to a standard. So if it's something that can't be linked to a standard, they're very curious as to why and what I'm teaching. So it's taken some explaining about them, just giving more information about what the standards are, what they do, what they don't do, limitations, affordances, so on and so forth. And using a lot of the language that we're talking about here and now has been helpful in this, because a lot of the parents, even some of the administration, really have seen this as like the end-all be-all, where really it's just like we're talking about, it's a frame. Just because we're continuing to teach things and our journey extends beyond the standards doesn't mean necessarily that it's terrible or it's inadequate or it's incompetent.
Right, or that it's wasting a time waster. I would imagine that's
right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another possibility. Oh,
no, go ahead,
another
Craig.
Possibility may be connection to standards outside of the English language arts standards. I mean, the math or science standards may very well offer a way out of that argument as, and I'll have to admit I know practically nothing about them. But on the other hand, there may very well be some overlaps there for work that we do that in fact is sustaining a STEM related goal or standard that overlaps.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I so appreciate you bringing that in. I've actually brought in several like history standards that I've pointed to with administration and parents, and it's this question of why can't it be interdisciplinary, even if the classroom isn't necessarily sanctioned for that. And it's so interesting too, there's several states that are developing social justice standards too that I've been looking at, even though Montana doesn't have a set of those necessarily. I've been looking at what other states are doing with some of these other types of standards, labeling it like ELA. So
right.
I also want to speak up here, and although Christy may be on the verge of saying this too, but the other projects in Montana, I mention particularly the work of the College and Career Ready
Commission.
Readiness Standards Commission that the superintendent put together about 3 years ago.
Right.
Brings people from industry and parent groups and the governor's office together, and the curriculum groups together to discuss the development, actually, and report the development of things such as the health standards in the state that are external to and complementary of the National Common Core standards. And Monday, in fact, the Commission is meeting to talk about new digital literacy standards that Christy, that your division has developed, well, in part developed, right?
Yes, and I don't know if of that meeting that's going on, but we are definitely, there's a talk about digital literacy. They're talking also, Melissa, about the, social justice and new social studies standards and how that is going to come together, come apart. We are in the process of working with the Board of Public Education on creating a standards timeline, actually, for when we in Montana will revise these different standards. And we just in the last few months passed the new science standards, new art standards, and new health enhancement standards. And so I would, kind of second what Kurt was saying about especially the arts standards. When we had the Arts Summit here where we were sort of celebrating the new art standards, it's so applicable to other subject areas as well, as far as creating, performing, producing. So a lot of those standards will really come together with the ELA standards, and also that could help you too, Melissa, in some talk with parents like, okay, so these are strict ELA standards, but we also have, they integrate and move across disciplines and, help sort of broaden that framework for students as well. So definitely keep an eye on those too. And there are more in development. And the digital literacy for me in particular is sort of the way that we're thinking about it here, and it's still very early on, but it's sort of that's where so much of the that disciplinary literacy comes together now, especially with everything being so online and so digitally based. So a lot of that to me is where that kind of comes together, and it will be really interesting to see where those standards go. But again, thinking of them all as sort of these, sort of steps on a journey, and pieces of a puzzle that come together for students, you know, as they're moving through their educational journey.
And the
I hope all that
downside,
made sense.
Yeah.
the downside, or one downside anyway, is that it just means all the more resources to become familiar with, all the more, I mean, whether we call them rules and regulations or opportunities or to solve, problems to solve. There are many sets of them, but in terms of answer to that question of does this activity in class or does this week or does this unit support individual standards, well, they probably do, but they may be outside of the ELA standards. And I wanted just to mention one other thing and then I'll shut up. Another set of standards or a program within the state is the Pathways program, which has a direct relevance, especially to career-based students. And a lot of the goals and programs and particular standards of the those professional programs are enormously helpful as guidelines for work-related activities and projects and, well, expectations.
Yep.
Awesome.
Agreed. Agreed.
Kurt, you don't have to feel like you need to shut up. You're good. We appreciate your feedback. So I hope that you don't feel like you're talking too much. That's the point of this, is to talk about these things. And I always learn so much from everyone. If we don't mind, I think we'll move on to question number 4. And this brings us back to, we have 2 texts. The first one, right, is the one that we read, which is from Marshall, and says to write for an audience, you really need an audience. And Bridget and I, in talking about this, Kurt had shared with us, if you scroll to the bottom of the document, you'll see that we had kind of a second piece from Rob Jenkins, which was the retention in the trenches, and that came out of the Chronicle of Higher Education. And it's a very large chronicle, so that article is on page 31 through 33 as you're kind of looking at that. But he looks at that concept of, you know, and I think this ties in perfectly with what Melissa was just saying, that, you know, what we do in our English classrooms then needs to move into real-world writing. And he writes, you know, illustrating my point with actual scenarios and relevant examples. My goal is not to entice them to love writing, as I do. That's not going to happen in most cases, but rather to help them understand that it's their best interest to learn to do it well and that they can do it to apply themselves. So, Bridget, my question is, you know, and these were just some things that we had thought of because it was what we were familiar with, but I would really stress that that etc. is huge. So we mentioned things like Genius Hour, Socratic Circles, gamification, letters to the next president, letters to businesses. I know op-ed letters have been huge, and this is where we like stealing what all of you have done and shared and other resources. So I also would ask if there's something you've tried that didn't work, knowing that as well. Like, you know, letters to the president might work better with one class and not with another age or something like that. So we'll just write for a little bit more. So I'm also just looking at time right now, and maybe because we're such a small group this week, it seems like most of us have commented on each other's writing for question number 4. I would just ask, is there anybody who really wants to share, maybe didn't feel like you could write enough because it was such a short time? So any kind of general comments on this question, or do we want to move right on to question 5, just seeing that we have about 7 minutes before we're finished here?
Well, I don't know. One of the most successful models, for whatever reason, is in our introductory literature class, which is not a core requirement at the University of Great Falls, but it does meet a exploring the liberal arts option for students. And whether the focus of the class is classical myth or fantasy literature or satire or the Arthurian legends, one of the assignments that always shows up is an end-of-term narrative story in which the students have to pick a plot conflict or a character or a setting that has impressed them through the semester, through the work with various authors and narratives and images, and create a 5 to 10 minute narrative story, anecdote, that controls the audience of the story. For example, children or other members of the environment, the Trojan War, or whatever the students happen to pick, and to then pick a point of view, a narrative point of view. It can be sort of the objective once upon a time, or it can be one of the characters, such as Polyphemus, in his years after Odysseus has visited, as a tour guide to the island for visitors who are curious. Anyway, the formation of a story, a literature essentially, that students in the class create shows me, or for assessment of their degree of understanding of the number of choices that a literary artist faces.
That sounds awesome.
Oops, I was muted.
Anybody
I
else
was agreeing.
Oh yeah, and I videotape all of them and invite the campus communities to see them. And if several students in a class want to tell stories for children, we read Nathaniel Hawthorne in the mythology class, Hawthorne's Tanglewood Tales, and some of them read the Wonder Book. And so for those who want to tell stories to children, we find an elementary class someplace in class, and then either go as a kind of a field study to them, or we invite sort of young people connected with campus to campus for a presentation of the stories.
I think that involvement of community is also so important, and so often we forget to showcase that work of our students for whatever reason, and it's really powerful, right, for them to be able to share. So moving on, looking at kind of that same concept, right, of what can we do to kind of celebrate those things and enjoy those things. Question number 5 also comes out of that Jenkins piece, and it's looking at that idea of, we love what we do and we love trying to work with students, but how do we get students to stop seeing us essentially, and the text refers to it as gatekeepers, right, that idea that we have the answers and they have to make it through our class before they can actually write. And so it's an interesting statement. We'll just write on it for a couple minutes and then come back for kind of closing remarks.
Sounds good.
So I am, as much as I hate, especially with the irony of the gatekeeper on this moment, I'm going to point out that it's 4:30, and I know folks need to go right at 4:30, but there's just some incredible writing in this last piece. Again, right, I know that the four of us are the people who, it's like talking to the choir at this point. But really powerful pieces. Is there anybody who wants to comment just quickly on theirs, knowing that we are almost out of time here?
I do want to just say that we have been getting a lot of people that come back to the Teacher Learning Hub to take the course, and they're viewing these documents and getting this information. And so thank you all for sharing your thoughtful comments and really opening up the dialogue for teachers around the state to be part of. I think this is a really key piece of us understanding our own practices and sharing that with others, and this just continues to be a wonderful piece for all teachers. So thank you all.
Awesome.
Maybe next month we need to do and bring a friend. So
Oh,
Yes.
everyone logs in with someone from across the curriculum. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll figure something out. But.
Well, and this is a week that there's a holiday on Monday, and I just feel like it always kind of throws off the week. I don't know about anybody else, but it just seems to. So I don't. Not all schools were off for Monday, but it just throws the week off anyway, I think.
Yeah. So thank you all for being here. It was awesome. And Marjorie, it was nice having you observe us or listen to us. Or
It was really interesting to listen to the conversation, how it flowed. So
Yeah. Thanks,
well,
Marjorie.
maybe next month you'll join us in more forms than one. So.
And Christy, you'll have to put in your own shameless plug next week for the NCTE annual meeting.
I will do that. Yes.
And maybe even preview your All Montana session.
Yes, and Kurt is pointing out that I will be presenting with Caitlin Schiller at NCTE, and I know that we may actually moonlight some of our PLC people during our presentation, because I think Wendy and Bridget are actually going to be there
And
this
Melissa,
year as
you'll
well.
be there as well, won't you?
Yeah, I'm presenting too.
Yay!
Yeah, so we'll all be. That's awesome.
Christy and Wendy, I'm not sure if there's some way maybe to put in or mention a little bit about the work of the SEAM meeting that we had. Maybe some of the conclusions or ideas or results from a couple of those groups might be practical focal points for upcoming sessions.
That's a great idea. Yeah. All right, I jotted it down, Wendy, but I have it on a Post-it, so maybe you would capture that in a more permanent place.
on my sticky note that I have right here.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I know folks need to go, so thank you so much. You are all amazing, and
Thanks,
we'll see you well, some of you will see in Helena. So
That's
I was
right.
going to say, yeah, I'll see you too in Helena for sure.
Are you going to be here? Excellent. We will look for you. All
Perfect.
right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.